You're now tuned into 13 Science Astrology YouTube channel. What we're gonna do is go right into it. So, like, you have what's called a zip code, and when you start talking about credit, credit is stored in zip codes. So when you start talking about the internet and the lettering and the coding that goes into programming and linking certain websites together ties into various different zip codes. Now, when you start getting into this, you'll find out that these zip codes were based on certain ley lines and electrical connections at certain major points, even before the zip code may have been established. The reason why certain numbers were used in different various zip codes is because this represents a major ley line on the grid or a major point. So when you get into what's called linking our internet up with various zip codes, they use lettering. That's what I want to get into a little bit today. Now, there are various different letters that are removed from our alphabet when it comes to linking up with various different websites from my studies and my research. And a lot of programmers, I don't believe they know this. Now, for instance, when you get into programming and you do your count and you get into any type of a zip code and you're doing programming or work in that zip code, you have to remember this. This is considered a sample. And when you sample something in a zip code, you have to utilize a certain letter. And it's the letter X, according to UCCs and things of that nature. You have to use the letter X. So what do I mean by that? In your sample, the letter X has to be covered. It has to be captured, meaning that you're typing on a computer, for instance, in a certain zip code. You may not know this. Every time you get to that 24th letter, it's a sample. So you type in, you may type 5,000 letters. This is being calculated somewhere in a zip code, even if you're doing it on a phone even. And it's being calculated and stored in its credit, believe it or not. And a lot of it is left in the zip code. It can be eventually converted into money over time. So this is when you get into monetizing, this is how you get into finding money that may not necessarily be seen in a certain zip code. So when you monetize, it's more than just, I just counted out $50,000. Like, for instance, we've counted out since the last one, like $7,000 or $8,000 or something like that. So you can be like, I just counted out $7,000 or $8,000, boom, I'm rich. But it's like, where did that go? What type of communications that you establish? I'm teaching people how to do this, just giving the information out for free. You can donate to 13scienceastrology at gmail.com, PayPal if you choose to. And, if not, I love doing this. I love talking about this because it's so deep. It goes into a lot of stuff. But, so yeah, you in that zip code typing up all of this information and it's being stored. That's my point. On some type of a server or hard drive or whatever the case may be. Even when you make your credit transactions, same thing. When you buy something from a particular place or a particular zip code, this is considered a sample. And if you don't sample that 24th letter, meaning that either it's going to cost $24 you buying something, or you can say, well, I'm going to use change, but that doesn't always work. Like, you may just look at it as pennies instead of looking at it as dollars if you don't have a lot of money or whatever. You're just buying something in a zip code. But either way, it's a sample and it turns into an account. And there are certain letters that are missing when it comes to converting. This is where it gets interesting. And my lawyers out there kind of know what I'm talking about, but they don't even know. It's a deeper secret. But there are certain letters even missing when it comes to converting these monies over to UCCs, because they use money and they look at money as lettering. You got to remember that in UCCs, they look at it as letters first before it's converted over to units, what you would call like 20s, dollars, and actual money. See, this is going into like how the money is printed. You may think like, well, this is crazy, this is wild, what do you mean? But this, you as a sovereign, you fund, we're about to go deeper into this soon, because as a king or a queen, you fund accounts. You're a commodity to them. If you learn how to take back your sovereignty, but if you don't know how to do it, you're going to be lost. So this is going into like some deep lettering and coding. So there's a couple letters I want to point out that they're going to be using in the news and the media. And they're going to be using the letter K and the letter I. I was talking to someone about this privately. This is the 9th and the 11th letter of the alphabet. And this is going to become very popular over the next few years as far as using these particular letters when it comes to doing samples and stuff like that with the UCCs, because now the letter X has been transitioned because of what happened with some stuff over in London, the Queen of England. That's something I want to point out too. So now some people are looking at credit and commerce from the so-called king perspective, but it's not what you think, brother. You're not just a king at that point, because we've transitioned over and now they're using that title. There's certain lettering now that's been missing is going to be removed from the UCCs, and they're going to be utilizing other letters. That's what I'm getting into, because of the fact that they're going to go back to this older alphabet eventually when it comes to the internet. Because I was telling people on the internet, I was saying this on a couple videos back, they're going to remove the number 19 or the letter or the number 19 as far as looking at stuff like 1950 this, 1950 that, and it's a reason why they're going to do this. And that's what a lot of people were fighting. But now that we're having all these transitions here in the media and things of that nature, and they're announcing these deaths and things of that nature, from my perspective, this is going to happen a lot quicker. So like when you're doing your samples, this is my point, in a particular zip code, there are certain numbers, like once you get past 24 and you start to do like a longer sample and create what's called a bank account. This is like if you work in a particular zip code and you come there every day. This is a bank account. Essentially is what it is. It's a king account or queen account, depending on how you set it up. And it's an account. And when you come in that area, it could be calculated, added up, and eventually converted once it gets to a certain point and turned into credit, because they have to get rid of extra credit and do stuff with it. So when you start talking about coupons, discounts in certain areas, stuff like that, giveaways, and things of that nature, this is not, someone's paying for that. They call it, some people call it everyone's credit. It goes into different terminology and names, but that's not my point here. Someone's funding that. And the way that that's created is through what's called UCC codes. So like when you're having sex in a zip code, they love that. Why? Because it's quick. That's what I want to talk about, and I'll shut down real quick. Why do they love sex? Because it's quick. Once you do that exchange, the chemicals are released or whatever, boom, that's the contract for them. That's why it's worth so much money to them, because it's a quicker exchange. However, over time, and this is what I get into and why they got scared of me, and they probably think I'm nuts now, but even still, over time in that particular zip code, when too much sex goes on in a zip code, there has to be a balance in that particular zip code in the electrical grid, because sex is powerful. You create a lot of electricity with sex, right? But over time, the grid can become too dense, and it could slow down the commerce in that area. So there's certain other exchanges you could do going into like herbs and like some of the stuff we was talking about in the last episode to shift that, and they know that. So they, you know what I'm saying, some people become frightened because they like, you're doing something that's adding something to your body that's not, normal, to cause an outward change. And this is kind of looked at and frowned upon by, of course, a lot of people. They don't respect that. However, there's a lot of things that we add into our body that isn't normal once we come on this plane. Like even, for instance, some of the air stuff that's in the air that we breathe is not native to our body, you could say that's an excuse or whatever, but a lot of these chemicals and stuff like that don't have to exist. You drive around, we drive around in these cars, we all do it. We ride around in these cars, buses, whatever, and put extra chemicals into the so-called ozone layer, which goes into another dimension actually, but into the so-called ozone layer, and filthy it up and dirty it up, whatever you want to call it. You know what I'm saying? And then other people have to breathe that in, and that's an energy exchange as well that has to be eventually balanced in a certain zip code, or could eventually lead to a meltdown because of the change in weather, which you're seeing in a lot of areas based upon too much traveling and moving in cars. And that's why a lot of countries, it's banned to like drive and use a certain amount of gas or whatever. You have to have like an electrical car or whatever the case may be. And that's more popular in certain areas, and they're going to get more into that in the future. That's what's going to come. So my point here is that you as a sovereign, once you take back and learn how to like operate and move in a certain area, you'll become in a moving account. And eventually over time, you'll begin to get extra credit off of that. You'll begin to get, your credit score will go up. Like I said, you'll get more discounts, things of that nature, if that's like what you're into. But if you're a business person and you're doing these samples, it increases your credit on a business level, which is, it multiplies because you begin to connect with other people's credit. You can monetize off of that using other people's credit, utilizing other people's credit, as long as you learn how to invest the units. And this is what a lot of people don't do or don't know how to do. They don't realize that there's certain, when you start going into like keeping a number in an account, there's certain numbers and letters that are left out and it's offset. So like for instance, what I'm doing now, I'm gonna give you this example and I'm gonna shut down. I'm only using 22 letters to work instead of 26. You know, they say it's 26 letters in the alphabet. I'm taking out 4. I'm not gonna say which ones. I'll do another episode. But 4 is removed anyway. And I'm working with 22 letters for a reason. That's what I wanted to kind of point out, because of the fact that if they remove that 19 from the coding, we're going to go into the number 22. And that's going to be good, because that's going to cause a major spike in credit and Visa shares. It already happened. Like since last year, we made over $60 a share profit from what we've seen in Visa shares from this formula or whatever. But essentially that's what I do, and it causes a spike and increase in like stocks and things of that nature too as well, because like when you start talking about trading, this all goes from a grid, an electrical grid that's controlled by a super computer that was eventually established from the zip codes that were set up based upon this electrical grid. So when you start talking about talking on your telephones and all of that type of stuff, this goes into credit that's been left in store. Your ancestors probably got $50,000 and $60,000, $100,000 worth of phone credit stored. You don't know this. This is something you learn how to do, but there's certain ways and certain key codes on how to access it. So that's when we get into certain numbers. So it's like, where do you start? That's what we'll talk about in the future and go more into. Sometimes you start at 0 and sometimes you'll start at 1. And I'll tell you why on the next episode.